Good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Bingle, and I'm the director of the DeKalb County Nonprofit Partnership. And I want to thank you all very much for joining us today. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We'll be recording today's webinar, and the recording will be sent to you later on this week by email. That'll be included in that email will also be an evaluation form for you to provide feedback about today's session. We have everyone muted right now, but please feel free to use the Q&A and chat at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to be saving some time at the end of today's webinar to address questions that you submit. We'll plan to have about 45 minutes of content and then 10 to 15 minutes for questions, and we plan to wrap up in about an hour. So with that said, we're really excited to welcome Paul Lalonde here for today's session titled Human Resources in a Changing World, Part 1. And here's a little bit about his background. Paul is an enthusiastic human resources professional with over 10 years of experience, specializing in organizational leadership, employee learning and development, organizational structure, diversity and inclusion, general nonprofit management, and more. Paul currently serves as the HR Director for the Community and Economic Development Association of Cook County in Chicago, the largest community action agency in Illinois. Paul is an avid reader and writer. He opines on his blog, the HR Philosopher and the Society for Human Resources Management blog. He's presented to local SHRM chapters and conferences on a variety of HR topics. In addition, he does consulting for nonprofits through his business, HR Logic. On a personal note, Paul is a St. Louis Cardinals fan, a self-professed Game of Thrones geek, his words, not mine, and a heavy metal enthusiast. He's also a proud husband, father, and owner of a disobedient cat. Welcome, Paul. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Ben, thank you. And I'm glad to be back in capacity. I see a lot of familiar faces in the name scroll, or I should say a lot of familiar names in the name scroll. I can't see any of your faces yet, but good to see a lot of you here, and thank you for being. So today we're going to discuss human resources in how you manage your staff in the COVID pandemic. So here we go. You know, obviously the world has changed quite a bit in the past 6 months. If you would have asked anybody in a job interview 5 years ago, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Every single one of them would have gotten it wrong, probably. So much like how in the financial sector helped save a lot of businesses and organizations during the Great Recession, it's been opined that human resource professionals are helping save a lot of businesses during the COVID pandemic. And I put up a tweet there from a friend named Laura, who owns a staffing company in New York. And she had brought that to my attention. I thought that was a really interesting comment. So again, part of it is you don't have to be an HR expert to get and understand parts of HR. Everybody's job has a little bit of HR in it, I would argue. So topics we're going to talk about today are 3 things, and I tried to keep it pretty high level as best I can. So first is really COVID-19 response basics. We'll talk about what an essential is, general CDC and OSHA guidance, turn to work guidelines. I think that one is incredibly important for a lot of folks. We're going to talk about contact tracing and some workers' comp considerations. We're going to talk a little bit about the FCRA, which is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And then finally, some remote work best principles at a high level, because I would assume many of the attendees have some form of remote work over the past 6 months. Before we get too far into it, I would just need to throw this up there. I am not a lawyer. I pretend to be one as an HR practitioner, but I consult my legal team routinely, and you should do the same. But again, a lot of these topics are things that you can implement and should be working in conjunction with whoever your legal counsel is. So before we begin, want to take a quick poll. So we're going to ask the audience, Regis, essentially, what has been your biggest challenge during the last 6 months? So with that is, everyone can make your poll go up there. Keeping your doors open, enacting policies and procedures to keep clients and staff healthy, adjusting to work from home, or other. So I see a lot of the results coming in. We'll just take a minute to let you all vote on that. Seems pretty close to adjusting to work from home arrangements and enacting policies and procedures to keep people safe. So, yep, and the clear winner is adjusting to work from home arrangements. So I'm glad I threw that in there for you. I'm pretty glad to see too that keeping your doors open hasn't been a major issue, although I think it always is a little bit. So, all right, I'm going to go on. So what is top issues on HR department's mind? So what is keeping a lot of us up at night? This was a recent poll that I had found that from Culture X organization. They did a study that says the health of employees has been top of the list for a lot of HR practitioners. But then also towards the top of the list is transitioning to remote work. So everybody in the audience, you're not alone. I think people across the country have been struggling in some way of doing that. So we'll talk more about that later in the presentation. Protecting employees' jobs, communicating frequently and clearly. I can tell you that during March and early April, I was frustrated as all get out because I would create all these great plans and procedures based on all the guidance that was out there. And literally within a day, sometimes the same day, I'd have to throw it all out the window because something else came down the pipeline that changed. So I think everybody has change fatigue a little bit. So top issues on employees' minds. Job security is number one, and I don't blame a lot of folks. Along with that is personal health. Childcare and homeschooling is a huge concern, especially now as we're rolling back into the new school fall semester. A lot of people are concerned about remote work, and stress, mental health is a big one. So there's a lot of things for people to be concerned about and wonder about. So I'm going to start with essential business. So what is an essential business? We're going to talk according to the law or according to your own operations. Now I'll get into the law in just a minute, but you have to ask yourself, if you are an essential business, according to the Illinois mandate, and you remain open, do you have the ability to implement the government mandates that's coming down? Do you have the ability to implement the OSHA regulations and requirements? Do you have the ability to train your staff and train yourself? Do you know what all of this means? Because it's pretty high level at certain areas, but and none of us, most of us, I would think in the audience aren't doctors, so it's hard to know what exactly is going on. Do you have the ability to obtain supplies, equipment, PPE? I can tell you at first, it was incredibly difficult to obtain hand sanitizer. We couldn't find it at CETA. After a couple of weeks, we ended up finding one from a gin distillery. It's kind of funny that we didn't know that when we ordered it, but when it comes in, the hand sanitizer, it smelled like gin. It wasn't anything you could have without making yourself really, really sick, but we all had kind of a good laugh about that. And then always think about public confidence. Just because you're open, does that mean that people are confident that you're doing what you can to them? most of the not-for-profits that I've worked with, not all, of course, but many, work with the most vulnerable in our communities. So who's the most susceptible to COVID-19 is the most vulnerable. So are you doing what you can to maintain the safety of your clients? I would always advise create an exposure control plan if you're an essential business and you're staying open. A control plan does, it identifies potential hotspots for the virus spreading. So take a look at how you operate and where the virus could potentially enter into your operations. It talks about investigation methods, which is contact, I'll do a little bit later, and then cleaning plans. Address your specific controls. I'll go into those and how you control your environment to make sure that you're doing the best to keep people safe. And of course, include training for your employees and of course yourself. So here is the executive order that was by Governor at the end of March. So it's kind of interesting, but there's such a huge list here that if everybody's essential, who isn't essential? But when I was thinking about some of DeKalb County's not-for-profits, some of the line items in there were healthcare and public health operations, human service operations, charitable social services, food production, transportation, and residential facilities and shelters. All of those are exempt. So a good majority of DeKalb not-for-profits, or just not-for-profits in general in Illinois, could be considered essential businesses and continue to operate. So when we talk about CDC and OSHA high-level guidance, what do they recommend and what should you take a look for? So there's potential exposure versus confirmed case, and you handle them obviously with the confirmed case of COVID-19, you know it's there, so you do your procedures accordingly. Potential exposure leaves a little bit of a thought process to it. Should we, shouldn't we? That's where the exposure control plan comes into place and you have a response ready so you don't have to guess what to do. So a potential exposure means being a household contact or having close contact within 6 feet of an individual with confirmed or suspected COVID-19. The time frame having contact with that individual is within 48 hours as the individual becomes symptomatic. So the example would be I'm going to work and I'm working with Glenn, and Glenn seems fine. He's okay. He goes home, and then the next morning he calls in and goes, "Man, I'm just not feeling well. I'm having some trouble breathing, and I'm just real tired. I'm going to go get tested for COVID." That's a potential exposure because it's not a confirmed case. It could just be that he has the flu, and that's one of the frustrating things about COVID-19, that it mimics so much of the flu. So you should enter your potential exposure protocols at that point because it's within a 48-hour time period. Now, if it's Thursday afternoon and Glenn takes Friday off, has a great weekend, he takes Monday off because he won a 4-day weekend, then he calls in on Tuesday because he started feeling really sick and has the exact same symptoms that he talked about. That's outside the 48-hour window, so it's not a potential exposure. Now, you could be overly cautious and just implement it if you wanted to, but you don't necessarily have to based on some of the guidance. So what are those responses that you put in place for Glenn? There's a minimalist approach, and that's just a 14-day self-quarantine. So you go, okay, Glenn, you got to stay home for 14 days and don't come back to work. And that's all you do. It's not really recommended, but it's at least something rather than doing nothing and just letting Glenn come back to work and infect everybody. If it's a positive test or a suspected test, again, potential exposure, the recommended approach is mandatory 14-day quarantine, conduct contact tracing, which is who did Glenn come in contact with, and if he came in contact with them, what's the risk of them contracting what he had. You identify all the areas that are used by the employees, you implement a cleaning regimen, and you notify everybody who may have come in contact with Glenn at the time. And you don't share Glenn's name, even though I am. That's a HIPAA violation, and it's a right to privacy. No one has the right to know that Glenn is sick. They just need to know that somebody could potentially have come in contact with COVID-19. And depending on other regulations, you notify the local health officials. So some other protocols, I'm going to kind of run through this because I got a lot to go through, and I did want to leave time at the end for things. So pre-screen employees before they come back to work. I think take temperatures. Always have your employees regularly monitor themselves. You know, if they start feeling ill, they should just go home right away. Seek doctors' approval to come back to work if necessary. Strongly consider having a mask policy. Whether you believe in the masks or not, the science is pretty on board with wearing the mask helps stop a lot of this stuff. So I think having a mask policy for common areas when you can't maintain social distance, it's a really good policy to have. And then social distance policies. Make sure employees maintain at least 6 feet, and if they can't, then make sure that they wear the masks at that time. And then implement a rigorous disinfecting and cleaning process throughout your organization. So just so you're aware, employers may ask employees if they are experiencing symptoms of COVID-19. You can ask your employees to screen, like using the CDC guidance. You can take your employees' temperature before they start work. And employers may require employees stay home if they have symptoms of COVID-19. So your rights are very clear as employers. You can do these things. You can require a doctor's note to certify fitness for duty to come back. It doesn't necessarily need to say that they're free of COVID, et cetera, et cetera. It just needs to say they're free to come back to work. And I've implemented that at various stages, and it's another really good liability to help. What I would highly recommend, and the employer must send home or require telework if you have that availability when the employee is exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19. So if someone comes in and they're just coughing up a storm, it could be, you know, allergies, it could be something, but part of the problem with COVID-19, it mimics so many other symptoms. It's just best just to send the employee home. And we'll get into other reasons. You'll see the importance of that later. The employer may send home or require telework if the employee is asymptomatic, but knows he's been in close contact with somebody. So if Max comes in one day and Max's wife, you know, through something else, and she tells you that she had COVID-19, Max is fine, but you're like, yeah, you know, Max, you live with your wife. I need to send you home because you just work from home, figure it out, stay home for 14 days. If you remain asymptomatic, then you can come back to work. The better thing is just go get tested if you can. And the employer can send an employee, should send an employee home who's just returned from an area with widespread ongoing transmission. So what we did at CETA was we just copied the Chicago ordinance. And what Chicago did was they have a list of high-risk states that once you visit that state as a Chicago resident, you have to stay home for 14 days. It's like Texas, Florida, et cetera, et cetera. CETA decided to just copy that. And so we just adopted that. And we think that that's, one, it shows your employees that you care about what's going on. And two, it's just you doing your due diligence to ensure stopping the transmission of it. You can't force, nor should you, have your employees not go on vacations or do whatever or live their life. It's their decision. It may not be the smartest one in everybody's eyes, but as the employer, it is your right to control the work environment and keep it safe. So that was one of the things that I recommend doing. So here I just threw up a bunch of documents that you can bookmark that have been very useful, that I think are worth checking out. So here are some of the hierarchy of controls I was talking about before. So how do you work your environment to maintain a safe workplace? So I'm not going to talk about elimination because I think that's far outside my pay range to try and figure out how to eliminate COVID-19. And substitution, you can't substitute it. It's not going anywhere. It's here. So we're just going to focus on some engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE that employers and not-for-profits can take to ensure a more safe working environment. So ask yourself with engineering controls. Now, engineering controls isolate people from the hazard. So can the office space and work cells be reconfigured? Can you space out the desks? So if you have 2 people to an office, can both of them work at home? Number one, and if they can't, can you space them out to where they're not in the same office anymore? So ask yourself those questions. Do barriers exist? Can I buy plexiglass to make a barrier between me and the other employee? Can employee entrances and exits comply with spacing? So you'll see a lot of places like Targets or Walmarts, they'll shut down one of their entrances and all people have to funnel through one and then they leave through the other. That's been a big thing. A lot of employers have done that as well. Do I need to place directional arrows in the office? Is your office so much of a free-for-all that you need those directional signs to just help keep people away from one another? And did you post signs? Wear masks, social distance, wash your hands. Although stay home when sick is a big sign I think should be plastered everywhere. Some administrative controls. Now administrative controls change the way people work. So can you create social distancing like I talked about before? Should you develop a cleaning schedule? I say yes. And if you do, how often? When does it happen? How do I know that it's happening? So people who have third-party cleaners, how do you know that they're doing what you need them to do? Check into it. Can some staff still continue to work remotely? Just because we're in phase 4 of Illinois' reopening plan and many people are going back to the office, ask yourself seriously, should they? If they've been working from home and they've been relatively productive and valuable contributors, why would you need them to come back? At least not now. So think about those things as you're working on your administrative controls. Can schedules be modified? This one's really important for working parents and really everybody, but working parents especially. Right now, we have a newborn. He's going to be 3 weeks old this week. I hear him upstairs right now crying. Thankfully, my wife is on maternity leave, so she can take care of him now. In a couple weeks when she's off, how's she going to do that while I'm working as well? I'm going to be doing a lot of work at night. So if my boss is good with that, the work is still done. It's just in a completely different way than the typical 9 to 5. And I think that should be standard practice going forward until we figure out some other things. So keep that in mind too. It's not when the work is getting done or how it's getting done necessarily. It's as long as the work is getting done and it's productive. And think too, is the job task essential? So what you need to do versus what you would like to do. So keep yourself, should we allow visitors and clients? That's a big one too. And I know I don't have the answers to that, and everybody's so unique and different. At CETA, we took in clients remotely and started doing it that way. We can't do that with all of the clients, though. So it's just, there's no one size fits all approach. PPE too, just real quick, PPE is to protect the workers. That's masks, hand sanitizer, I think is probably the big two. Strongly consider putting those in the office and having a mask policy. So real quick, some of the basics of contact tracing. So you took all this time, you set up your procedures, you set up your administrative and engineering controls, and you have people in the office. So the max comes down with COVID-19. What do you do? So again, staff appreciate the open transparency. So when you talk to them, it avoids the rumor mill. That's part of contact tracing. So I'll get into that in a minute, but contact tracing is a workplace investigation, and then you notify the workers. So I put a link up there. The best contact tracing rule is called the 6-15-48 rule. So the infected employee should identify others who they worked within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more within a 48-hour period prior to the onset of symptoms. 6-15-48. It's incredibly simple, and it's worked. I won't get into too many of the details, but this has become my golden rule in a lot of ways. So once identified, there's guidance for non-critical business on how to implement it, and then the critical business. But again, staff appreciate the open transparency and the rumor mill. When Maxine is away from the office for a few days, they're gonna figure out a notice, especially the smaller not-for-profits where there's like 2 or 3 staff. They're gonna know. You don't call it out and say, oh, they have COVID-19. You just say, this employee has COVID-19, they're out. You don't call them by name. They're going to figure it out, but they still appreciate, I think, the transparency and that you're doing what you can to protect them. So again, just to reiterate, you send the person for 4 days. They should be self-monitoring, check their temperature, etc. Watch for fever, cough, and shortness of breath. Those are the big 3 symptoms. There are 9 total, but for COVID-19, but those are the big 3. And then just make sure the employee avoids contact with people back at the office. And if anything, the CDC is your Bible. You should always go back to them for further guidance. So real quick, workers' comp. Under normal workers' comp situations, the employee has to prove that the injury or illness happened at the workplace. Well, when COVID-19, that's different. On June 5th, Governor Pritzker signed a bill that pretty much reverses that. Unlike in other workers' comp situations where the employee has to prove injury in the workplace, if the employee gets COVID-19, it's presumed that they got it in the workplace. So the employer has to prove that they didn't. So it's kind of a reversal. Now, of course, Illinois is notoriously employee-friendly for workers' comp, almost to the detriment of a lot of employers, unfortunately. But there is some ways out necessarily. They're called rebuttable presumptions. I won't go into them too much, but what does this new workers' comp law cover? It covers essential workers exposed to the general public at work or essential workers in locations with 15 or more employees. I cannot definitively say that if you have less than 15 employees that you are exempt, because when I showed you that earlier slide, and I did that on purpose, of so many essential businesses, that any employee at any time could say, well, I'm an essential worker, especially if you're still operating and holding work. So I would pay attention to this, even if you think that you're not exempt. And again, work with your legal operations, because without further definition or case law, many employees are going to claim, hey, I'm at work, I'm essential, I got COVID-19 at work, give me workers' comp. So there are three, duplicate slide, forgot to delete it, sorry. So there are three rebuttable presumptions, and I won't go into all of them. They're up there so that you have them and you can kind of analyze them to see what's what. But exemption 1 makes sense from this standpoint that the employees who worked at home didn't contract it at the workplace, right? So if they're working from home or they weren't at work and they got it, well, they couldn't have possibly gotten it at the work site. So number 2 is rather large. I won't read all of it, but it essentially represents the greatest opportunity for employers, because what this one states is if the employer put in all these procedures that I talked about earlier, put in the engineering controls, administrative controls, the employer has a COVID-19 response plan, and they're following it, then you can reasonably assume that the employer did everything they could and they didn't get it at work. That one, I think, has the biggest opportunity for employers to avoid a COVID-19 related workers' comp claim. It recognizes the importance of preventing the spread at work. And then the last one is the employee was exposed by COVID-19 outside of work. There's really no way to prove that. It'd be really, really impossible. So number 2 is the best bet. So if anything, the key takeaway from all this is just make sure you have an exposure control plan in place and document your efforts. So with that, we're going to do poll number 2. So where's the audience, Regis? So this one's important because it's going to tailor what I talk about next. So what is the size of your agency? You're 0, you're all voluntary, you're staff of 1, 2 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 49, or 50 plus. A few more minutes. It looks like 2 to 10 is leading right now. And actually, the vast majority, we have 3 that are 50 plus. The vast majority are 49 and under. So the 3 of you, I got some bad news for you. The 3 of you are going to have to pay extra close attention to this next one. And the rest of you, this is just a really good educational opportunity for you. But so thank you for taking time with that poll. So I'm going to talk about the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA. Again, as majority of you are under 50 employees, for the most part, you are exempt or could apply to be exempt. So this was a law that was passed earlier in the year. It is effective from April 1st to the end of the year. And it's really 2 laws. It mandates sick pay, up to 10 days sick pay for COVID-related illnesses. And it also expands FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act. Anybody who is 500 employees or less has to follow this. But of course, like I said earlier, there are some exemptions for super small organizations. So again, there are 2 components. The first is the emergency paid sick leave, and then the expanded FMLA. It's a whole bunch of tax credits available to it to help people pay for it. And then here's the guidance on it, the links for the guidance. And I know Ben is going to get the presentation out to everybody, so you'll have the links who need it and are interested in it. So the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, you have to provide all employees a total of 2 paid weeks related to COVID time. the equivalent of 80 hours or prorated leave. All employees are eligible, and it's capped at $511. I'm not going to get into those details. The nitty gritty of it is you just have to give 2 weeks sick time to all employees. So you're eligible based on inability to work, including telework, due to COVID-19. So essentially, if the employee has COVID-19 or a household member does, and they're taking care of that person, or there is a government mandate saying that they can't leave their house. So in Chicago, city of Chicago has that travel ban, 14-day travel ban. So if you come back and you can't leave your house, you're eligible to get this paid sick leave because it's related to COVID and it's related to a government policy. So the expansion of EFMLA, that's for schools that are shut down or childcare. So you get 12 weeks of job protected leave that's similar to FMLA, but it's to care for the employee's minor child because school or daycare is closed because of pandemic. Any employee is eligible after 30 days of employment. Under normal FMLA, it's usually 12 months and 1,200 hours worked. This is anybody who's been working for you for 30 days, they get it. And then it gets a little bit complicated. I'm not going to get into all the details because it's there in the regs and it can be read, but just wanted to make people aware of a lot of this stuff. So here's some of the small business exemptions that a lot of people with fewer than 50 employees I think would be most concerned about. So you can be exempt if any of this would result in your business expense and financial obligations exceeding available business revenues. For a lot of not-for-profits, that can be an easy case, right? The grants are extremely finite. The absence of the employee or employees would entail a substantial risk to the financial health. So if you're an employer of, let's just say 10, and 5 of your staff get COVID-19 and you have to pay them all be away, can you afford it? Maybe, maybe not. So, and finally, there's not sufficient workers who are able, willing, qualified to do the work that you guys have to do. So again, I have legal disclaimer, I'm not the lawyer, but here is the small business exemptions that you should talk about to make sure that you're in line and don't need to follow with the FFCRA. Here's just a nifty little chart in there, all the complications sort of distilled down for you. Then I love flowcharts. So here's a really good flowchart on if people are eligible or not for the sick leave. So finally, we're getting to remote considerations. So I would say majority of the people on the presentation today said this was their biggest concern. First question you need to ask yourself is it here to stay? Obviously, none of us know, we're not Nostradamus, but I would argue if I were a betting man, yes, it is here to stay in some capacity. It's fascinating because if you see a lot of businesses throughout the country said, you know, you can't do your job at home. There's no way that it's convertible to being teleworked. Then all of a sudden we entered into the largest trial run of work from home in the world, in world history. And many of those jobs, as it turns out, can be done from home. So I can tell you a lot of the benefits of allowing that. Ask yourself, do your employees have what they need to do their job at home? I think number one is IT. Do you have the IT capabilities? If you don't, it's going to be incredibly challenging. If you have some semblance of it, it could get done and piecemeal together. I know IT is always, for not-for-profits, at least in my experience, has always been incredibly challenging. Every computer's hand-me-down. When you get a new computer, it's like gold. So IT has been incredibly challenging for a lot of folks. Are your policies and practices in place? How many, I should have added in here, how many of you have a remote work poll and policy in place? I would say most, if they didn't before, may have it now, and people should get working on that. And is it working? If it is working, how do you know that it's working? You know, how are you keeping track of all that stuff? Always keep in mind too, comfort levels differ by age and generation. Now this is, I'm trying not to make a blanket statement without making a blanket statement, but most generations not growing up with technology at their beck and call are having more of a challenge with it. Not everybody, of course. There are plenty of baby boomers who are very comfortable with tech, more so than even some Gen Zs and millennials. But more often than not, the younger generations are far more comfortable with it and have dealt with it on a much better level than the older generations. And I've seen that firsthand a little bit. It just takes a little bit more coaching to help people who aren't as comfortable working from home adapt. So, right, how to effectively manage remote workers. Number one, you just hire the right people. That might not be 100% true for right now, just because your people are your people, but thinking forwardly, use the proper tools like I talked about, address accountability. Way to do that is share calendars. Use your tools once you get your tools. So invest in Microsoft Teams, OneDrive, Google Docs. If you have it, have some central hub where all of your people can access the files that they need to access. And once you have that, share your calendars. Do daily check-ins with your staff, at minimum weekly check-ins, but I say daily. Just keep people engaged and ensure the work is being done. With flex work, again, build trust, and you build trust by allowing for flexibility and not micromanaging them. So when you do your check-ins, you're not doing a check-in every day, every hour of every day. You're doing it once a day just to say hi, how you doing, what's going on, call me if you need, and then allow for flexibility. So if someone's working at 10 at night, allow them to do that because that's can get their work done. And then prioritize team building. That's a big one because you're not in the office together or seeing each other as much as you used to. So some things that you can do is have office games. There's a lot of like, what was it? Bingo, like Skype bingo, etc. So I always kind of laugh at that stuff. There's benefits to remote work, you know, benefits to the business. It gives you better access to talent, especially with not-for-profits who, as you all know, it's hard to recruit a lot of times. This could be a selling point. We allow people to work from home. It gives you flexibility. We can't pay you as much, but you can work from home. You won't get that elsewhere necessarily. It does increase productivity, and I can attest to that. I do more at work, more at home than I do in the office. A lot of that is because no commuting. You know, it takes me, 40 minutes to drive to the office on a good day. Near it takes me 40 seconds to walk downstairs and log on the computer. To the workers, more flexibility for them, no commuting, better work-life balance. So it is extremely helpful to a lot of businesses and workers. Some things to keep in mind, and you need to coach through your staff and yourself, is what do you struggle with when you work remotely? And I can attest to unplugging after work because it melds worlds. It used to be, all right, you'd clock out for the day, the whistle would blow, and you'd ride down the dinosaur like Fred Flintstone, and you're done. You're at home. You're not at work anymore. When your workspace is your home, it blurs the lines to not knowing when work begins and when home life begins. It can be very lonely. and we're social creatures, right? We're social animals. We need to interact with other folks. When you're at home, and if you live by yourself, it's even worse. But I love my wife. I love my kids. But when you see the same people every single day all the time, it just builds on that loneliness. You need that other interactions with folks. So that can be challenging. You know, collaboration can be challenging, but you just have to work through that together with communication. Of course, home distractions, but I would argue that you get distracted at the office all the time, you know? When you're sitting there and someone keeps knocking on your office door, that's sort of the same. So I think with anything, there's always these balance. A lot of good comes with work from home. There's also some challenges that we all have to work through and adjust to the new world order. So I wanted to give some other resources for you to take a look at. Some HR coronavirus resources, remote work resources for you to take a look at, and then some other items that may be of benefit to you. This is all free and you can go online. I just found these links and threw them up there for you. So before we go into the Q&A, I did just want to leave you all with this brief message that there is hope. All of these pictures I found are from the Spanish flu of 1918 to 1920. You can see that, you know, if you didn't know that they were black and white and time sensitive photos, you might go, oh, this looks like today. There's a guy at a barber shop, and they're wearing a mask, getting his hair cut. Just like today, you have to wear that. Baseball, all the players in baseball being back and all that, you can see they're all wearing the mask. The grainy yellow picture is actually from a college football game in Michigan, I believe. So there were people in the crowd watching college football wearing masks. Public transit up in the type corner, and then nurses and doctors wearing masks in there. I give you this because it might seem like today is just so different. We've never gone through this before, et cetera, et cetera. While very few people alive today have gone through a pandemic, remember humanity has gone through countless pandemics, and we're better suited today than ever before to handle those pandemics. So we'll make it through this. We've done it before. Unfortunately, 100 years from now, it'll happen again. But we do live in strange times. But again, humans are resilient. Just lean on each other. We will get through this together. So with that, I am, that's my contact information up there for everybody who needs it. And then I'll open it up for Ben to say any Q&A. I hope this was beneficial and useful to everybody.
Thank you, Paul. A lot of information in there. We really appreciate you sharing that with us. And I love your little cartoon character of yourself there. That's that's fantastic. I wasn't expecting that. So a reminder for our audience, if you have a question and you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and we can unmute you. Otherwise, you can use the Q&A that's at the bottom of the Zoom box to type in a question and we'll read that for Paul's response. In the meantime, I did have a couple questions that have come into me directly, Paul. One person is asking, outside of pay raises, which may not be possible this year, what are your creative recommendations for ways to recognize and incentivize our employees?
You know, I've been working and struggling on that too a little bit. I think taking the extra step to acknowledge staff by saying, you know, we're not going to have raises this year, you know, and go through the steps of why. I think people will appreciate that, and it shouldn't be a big shock to a lot of people. But after recognizing that and allowing space for people to understand that, do the little things. Write a handwritten note that states why you're so appreciative that this person works for you. You know, it could be as simple as taking a person out if they're comfortable with it, going out to dinner with them outside, socially distanced, to recognize them there. If they don't want that, buy them a gift card, just something small to their favorite restaurant. It's been those little things that I've noticed that people just seem to appreciate more than the raises. I mean, everyone needs raise. They love more money, but I remember when bosses in the past had given me just a small token of appreciation, much more than I ever remember any of the raises that I ever got.
Thanks, Paul. Dawn Littlefield asks, our staff has transitioned well to a combination of remote and in-person work. Any tips for best practices to engage interns or other staff that aren't as connected to our team?
I think the number one thing is whatever platform you're using, whether it's Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Skype, make that your best friend and do your daily check-ins. And I keep saying, because when you're at the office, you see those folks. Doing your daily check-ins is sort of the same thing. You're stopping by their office, show each other on the screen. Make it a policy that says, everybody should be on the screen. That way we can see each other's face. You can see the facial expressions, the tones, and all those things that keep people connected. I think that's number one. Number two, when you're not doing that, just pop in every once in a while on the chat function and just send them a friendly, hey, how you doing today? How's Bob or whomever? Just to stay connected. And it doesn't have to be anything big or long or huge, but just those little spot checks, I think, keep people connected.
We have another question here that says, how do you handle an employee that says he or she is very busy working from home and has a lot to do, but is not really accomplishing the work?
Mm-hmm. I would say it's approach it the same way you would approach it in the office. Prior to this, that was a big thing I would hear a lot about. I'm super busy, there's a whole bunch of stuff, but then the employee wasn't seeing results, or you weren't really seeing that. At home or in the office is the exact same thing. It's a behavior and it's a results driven. So just being open and honest and saying, look, I understand you're busy, but I'm not seeing the results. So there's no efficiencies there. There's no effectiveness. What's going on? And try having that open dialogue and walk through it. It could result with them saying, I don't have the right schedule. Work with them on a schedule that can matter long term. But when it comes to that particular example, I would say just handle it how you would handle if they were sitting next to you at the desk.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Another one here that says, it says, thanks, Paul. Do you interpret employers screening employees as a recommendation, requirement, or suggestion? Is doing so a form of workers' comp protection, meaning documentation that would support that someone did not likely contract COVID at work? And then a clarifying point there, meaning temperature screening specifically.
Mm-hmm. From my understanding, and again, this is my legal thought hat on, is screenings aren't necessarily required. They are a best practice and a best principle, and depending on if you can handle it, do you have the infrastructure to handle it? Because you have to think about, if I'm screening somebody every day, who's doing that? Are they keeping it confidential? Where are the records going? Et cetera, et cetera. What happens when they hit that 100.4 or the 100.4 and over? Are they going to be mad when I say you can't come to work, et cetera, et cetera? So you got to kind of take all that into approach. As far as the workers' comp connection, I would say yes, yes, and yes. The more you can do that's demonstrating that you're taking this seriously and protecting folks will go a long way. Will it 100% protect you? No, nothing ever does. But this not doing it will hurt more than actually doing it. And one tip I can always say, some employers I've seen have a policy where you have to take your own temperature and report it before you come to work. So you're putting the onus back on the employee a little bit to help them monitor, because some employees still aren't taking this as seriously as they should and are still coming to work sick. So you just got to look at your own operations and what makes the most sense and works for you.
What are you doing about patrons, clients, visitors who do not want to wear a mask?
Yeah, that's the challenging part, right? Um, you have to wear a mask, and you don't get the service if you don't wear the mask, and it's that simple. In a lot of grantors and funders, you'll see how that is being supported with that. Thankfully, and I feel so awful for like the 16 to 18-year-olds or the seniors that are working in front of Walmarts and just letting people in, because who's gonna tell them not to wear the masks? It's uncomfortable, it's awful to have to talk to somebody about that, but you use positive language and go, we have a mask policy, we need you to wear this to protect each other, and you put it on them as this is the teammate thing as far as employees are concerned. We need you to protect your teammates. We need you to protect our clients. We need you to protect one another. And you do that by wearing the mask. We don't want to get to the point to where progressive discipline is, but do know that if you choose not to wear it, progressive discipline comes into play. And when it comes to a client, y'all know your clients best and what works for them. We all have those ones that just don't want to follow the rules. Unfortunately, you're going to have to try as best you can to deny the service based on your grant guidelines. And I would hope that a lot of the grantors would be okay with that and comfortable.
Mary Holtrup asks, in regards to confidentiality regarding COVID, who should really know? The manager, other managers, HR, etc.?
HR should know, and the direct supervisor, and that's it. And even the direct supervisor shouldn't know all the details. They should just know that this person is out due to COVID-19, et cetera, et cetera. And again, that's really it. I think the direct supervisors, they have a right to know because of the business necessities, because they have to plan, et cetera. And so others are going to find out, they just will, because people post on Facebook, and it is what it is, but HR and the direct supervisor should begin and end there.
Okay. Thanks for your question, Mary. We do have a couple other questions. I realize we're at our time, but I think we can wrap up in just a couple more minutes because I do want to acknowledge these questions. How have your vacation travel policies changed, if they have at all?
We have a use it or lose it policy. It has not changed. And we've told people that just because the last couple of months you've been working from home, doesn't mean the vacation just goes away. You're not on vacation because you're at home working. You're expected to be working. So we've coached people up to say, take the week off and have a staycation. You're not checking emails. You're not doing anything like you would on a normal vacation. You're just doing it at home. So we've coached people to do that. And we've implemented, and I've seen a lot of others implement, a travel policy that states, again, we've followed the city of Chicago's and adopted that as our own. So employees are required to tell us if they're going anywhere. I don't need to know why. I don't care why, but I just need to know if you're going to Texas for more than 24 hours and you're coming back to work, you have to tell me because you're not coming back to work for 14 days, or you can telework for 14 days. And we've also implemented that internationally, including Canada and Mexico. So some staff have still gone through with their trips, and then they come back and they're just at home for 14 days, unpaid, unless they have PTO. That's their choice. or some of them have changed their plans based on that too, and they're not going anymore. So we're not looking to be the travel police. I don't want it to be the travel police and be judgmental about it. This is just purely from an efficacy standpoint of keeping people safe at work.
Can you talk a little bit about hiring, interviewing, and job offers during this time? Any thoughts or recommendations?
Yeah, number one is if you can do them via Skype or Teams or whatever, start there. If you absolutely have to bring them in, what we've implemented was a pre-COVID test. So we pretty much just give them a questionnaire, and there's 2 questions on it, and they have to answer no to both about have you had, not, because you can't ask people if they've had COVID, but you can ask them if they have COVID-like symptoms. So we ask them that, and if they answer yes to them, then we just push the interview off for a couple 14 days and then bring them in. If they answer no, then we bring them in, no handshaking, social distance, keep masks on if prefer masks on if you're in a huge room and you're 10 feet apart and both of you are comfortable. You don't have to wear the mask at that case, but all those type of things we've implemented.
Thank you, Paul. I don't see any other questions right now. So thank you again. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you sharing your time with us today. And a big thank you to everyone who joined us today as well. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending a follow-up evaluation that'll be sent by email along with the recording and the slides so that you have all of those resources at your fingertips. We encourage you, as always, to visit dcmp.org and follow us on Facebook for upcoming trainings and opportunities, or to sign up for our newsletter. And we're really excited to have Paul back for part 2 of this HR mini-series in September. And he's going to be talking a little bit more about mental health, motivation, and what you can all do to take care of your teams. We hope you'll join us for that as well. So once again, thank you for attending, and a big thank you goes to Paul Lalonde for sharing his time and expertise with us today. Thank you very much, and take care.